Good evening, everybody. Welcome to School Psyched Podcast. Tonight we're going to be talking with Mr. Jim Wright about RTI. We've got some really exciting things going on. We've also got some books that we're going to be giving away to participants in the broadcast, and we'll talk a little bit about how to participate. My name is Rachel, and I'm an NCSP currently working in the state of Texas. Anna?
Hi, I'm Anna, school psychologist working in New York State in special education. Rebecca?
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and I am a school psychologist working in Connecticut. Oh, and I'm really excited tonight to introduce our guest, but first I want to tell you guys also how to participate by asking questions or sharing your thoughts or comments either on School Psyched podcast page. Just comment at under the last post announcing our Psyched podcast tonight, or on Twitter using the hashtag Psyched podcast, or on School Psyched, your school psychologist page, which is the other page under the last post as well. We're really excited tonight. We have Jim Wright from Intervention Central, and we're hoping that, Jim, you can tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started and your books and everything.
Great, everything. Hey, thanks for inviting me. Kind of a thrill to be here on School Psyched. Yeah, my background is as a school psychologist. I spent 14 years working in Syracuse, New York as a school psych. And that's where I really got hooked on intervention, and when it came along, response to intervention. I thought, what a great, cool role for psychologists to actually be part of the solution and helping teachers to get intervention ideas to help kids. I actually went on and I worked for some years as a school administrator before about 8 years ago starting to work full-time privately as a consultant and trainer around RTI for academics and behavior. As you mentioned, published a couple of books. I had a chance to beef up my website, interventioncentral.org, which I'll put a plug in because I really want psychologists giving those resources away to teachers. Everything on Intervention Central is free and just waiting for you. But anyway, in a nutshell, that's my background. Even though I haven't been a practicing school psych for about 10 years, you know, in my default thinking about, you know, who am I and what do I do as a profession, I always think of myself as a school psychologist. And I think that because, in a way, I'm still in the, you know, indirect service business, but in this case, helping to, I hope, promote, you know, good ideas and support schools and support teachers. And I think school psychologists, as you'll hear me say tonight, are just the most important kind of, you know, group out there to really promote good change, good practice, and essentially response to intervention. So thanks for inviting me.
Okay, we're excited to have you. We know that I mean, interventioncentral.org is kind of a staple for us school psychologists. I mean, I was first introduced when I was in grad school, and I mean, it's just kind of the go-to website, and we really appreciate all the free resources and things like that. So it's awesome.
Well, thanks a lot.
It's very cool. So you wrote a book. Tell us about your most recent book, the one we're giving away tonight.
The most recent book looks at RTI, and it looks at the Common Core state standards, and the focus is actually at the classroom level. I was finding a lot of the work that I'm doing in consulting with schools and training teachers, it really came down to helping to make some change in the classroom itself. So very often the district would have an RTI plan, the building would have an RTI plan, there'd be RTI coordinators and support staff who are on board, but classroom teacher practice really hadn't changed yet. I call that the last mile problem of RTI, is getting to that classroom. So what I ended up doing was writing a book that was really focused on academic and behavioral intervention ideas and resources for progress monitoring that were really geared for that teacher. And again, the question from a teacher point of view is, why would they care? And I think they should care because for, you know, most of the states of our country, the Common Core state standards are really putting a lot of positive pressure on schools to help kids to achieve. Teachers are really feeling that pressure, and I think that now is a good time for, I think, school psychologists to be using RTI as kind of a solution to help teachers with those struggling kids who can't attain those standards. And really, that's the group I wrote the book for. Those teachers who are struggling, can't, you know, help some of those kids attain those standards, really want some ideas. That's what the book is about.
Awesome. Very cool. Although, you know, I have it in front of me, and so I was tempted to like really start reading up on it. I was like, no, I can't because it has to stay nice and new. But I did peruse the table of contents, and it got me very excited. So a lot of good stuff is covered for sure.
You're such an honest person.
And that's a very, I like what you said about the Common Core pressure, because there's positivity, but there's also so much stress.
Yes, yeah. I mean, New York is feeling it. Connecticut's feeling it. Texas is not feeling it. They've got their own pressures. Haven't adopted the Common Core, but you're right. It's really across the country. There's this amped up kind of anxiety about, helping those students to attain these very, very ambitious standards, and I think RTI is the blueprint for doing that.
Mm-hmm. So, Rachel, you want to get to our first giveaway?
Okay. So, like I said, we've got 2 books to give away tonight. The first we're going to give away, and then the second one's going to be kind of later in the broadcast. But in order to get this lovely book, which I have to mention to you is autographed by Jim, so very exciting, very fancy. What we want you to do, we've got, as Rebecca said, we've got a couple social media, outlets that we use. The first one, we want to encourage our Twitter followers and people who are on Twitter. So we're just asking you guys to, the first one who tweets out using the hashtag psychedpodcast, we want you to say, hashtag psychedpodcast loves interventioncentral.org, ! And if you're the first one to do that for the timestamp, we'll mail you a book. We'll get your address. So good luck. And Rebecca's going to be watching that. So.
You know what? I'm just going to break in for a second because one of our viewers let me know that he can hear the audio but can't get the video. So I want to ask anyone out there who's listening, if you can see us or not, could you let us know in a comment? Because I'm hoping that you can see, because Jim, I know, has slides to present. So please comment and let us know.
Okay, yeah, we definitely want the video. So
Yeah.
thanks for.
Let's see. Let's find out. Anyone out there, let us know if you. And he also let us know that we are also competing with NBA Finals tonight. So we have some tough competition, but I think I have faith in our fans.
Let's see. I'm trying to mess with some of the settings.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on just a second.
Any action on Twitter yet, Rebecca?
Let me look on Twitter. Nothing yet. Nope, not yet. Sometimes it takes a minute to load, but not yet.
Well, while we're waiting, I think we might as well get started because there's no
Yeah.
video right now.
I'm so distracted looking at Twitter and looking for comments, and now I'm hoping that everyone can see us, so I'm a little distracted by that. But we should get started. I know that they can hear us. Mm-hmm.
And also, if for some reason the on YouTube the link the video is not working there as well, and YouTube is also only audio, we can post the slides that Jim has on our Facebook page. So even if people are just hearing us, hey, the pressure's off us, and where's my hair and all that stuff, But
I'm going to try and leave the broadcast, guys, for a second, and then come back and see if that makes a difference.
Okay.
I'll be back.
Okay. Oh boy, so this is hasn't happened to us before. It's an unfortunate little thing. Oh look, we have a comment. Let's see. Sometimes they come to my phone more quickly than they come to my computer. Anna, you're still there, right?
I'm here.
Okay. And Jim's here. Okay.
I know.
Here.
Oh, good. Okay.
Well, the good news is I'm on YouTube. We have 14 people watching, so that's great. But it is only the audio, not the video.
It is audio. Okay.
That's what I'm seeing right now. So let's just resume and talk about RTI, and we can publish the slides on our page later. Does that sound good?
Let's do it.
All right. So, Jim, we had a whole list of questions. I actually did a poll on our Facebook page. We have an event page where we have like 100 RSVPs. So even if there's only 14 people logged in now with our technical difficulties, hundreds of people will watch this eventually. So we had a lot of great participation about what people are interested in hearing about. So we sent you those questions, and you have prepared a little presentation for us on the things that school psychs are interested in hearing about with RTI. So please share with us your answers.
Sure. First thing I want to say is, and I think this will be a help, I set up a web page on Intervention Central, my website, and it's a page set aside for this podcast where I've posted all the resources I'm referencing.
Oh,
so if people want to just take a moment and jot down this web address, it'll be interventioncentral.org, and then / School Psyched, so the name of the podcast, all lowercase. So again, that's interventioncentral.org / School Psyched, all lowercase. And if you go to that URL, you're going to find that I've got PowerPoints that you missed in this podcast, but they're posted, and all the resources I'm about to talk with you about have been posted there as well. So I think that's our safety net. And I'm just going to riff a little bit about these slides. First of all, let me tell you out there, if you're just listening and you can't see the video, these are the most beautiful slides you can imagine. So there you go. So the question is, first, one of the questions was what's important for schools to think about as they roll out an RTI model for mathematics. And of course, that is a pretty daunting topic. But what I want to address is that many schools have already adopted an RTI model in the academic side for reading, and we're going to use that as the template. So there's going to be that Tier 1, strong universal instruction. I, in my own training as an RTI person, talk about classroom interventions at Tier 1 as well. We talk about Tier 2, that at-risk student, adopting screeners to pick those kids up and put them into ideally small group instruction. And then those intensive need Tier 3 high-risk kids, maybe 1 to 5% of your population who might need a problem-solving meeting for a more customized and intensive plan. And that same 3-tiered model, school-wide screening, a proactive preventative approach, applies to math as well. Erica Lemke and some colleagues in 2012 published a neat article, Response Intervention in Mathematics, Critical Elements in Psychology in the Schools. And they had 6 kind of essential elements. They said that educators need to believe that every student has the ability to learn challenging mathematics when given effective instruction and regularly monitored. So that's kind of the basic principle. If we're going to be successful in RTI math, teachers have to believe that every student can be successful in mathematics in core instruction. Of course, all students would be screened 3 times per year using a math assessment battery that could identify those kids who may need additional supplemental assistance to fill in skill gaps. Just like with reading, the student on math intervention is going to have their progress monitored regularly to verify the interventions are working and to move those kids up and down the tiers as needed. Of course, the instructional practices and programs to support math interventions and math instruction are going to be research-based. The school is going to have several tiers in place with strong programming in each, so kids can ratchet up if they need more support, step down if they no longer need that support. And finally, that the school is regularly evaluating the quality of its math RTI model, including measuring intervention integrity to verify that it's as strong as it can be. Easy to say. There's a quote that I've got here, and I'm just going to read it to folks. This is from 2008, an article by Ben Clark and some colleagues. It's actually from Best Practices in School Psychology. And they said, quote, in contrast to reading, core math programs that are supported by research or that have been constructed according to clear research-based principles are not easy to identify. Not only, they say, have exemplary core programs not been identified, but also there are no tools available that we, the authors, know of that will help schools analyze core math programs to determine their alignment with clear research-based principles. Now, I acknowledge this article was written about 7 years ago, so there's been some positive movement. But it still remains a fact that we don't have as strong and I think solid a consensus about what represents a strong math programming, core instruction, and strong math interventions as we do on the reading side. And so one reason why people ask about math itself and what's that RTI model look like is because some of that research is still underway to tell us what's going to work best in math. I do have a slide that I've put up where I have listed the 5 big ideas in reading that many people know: phonemic awareness, the alphabetic principle, fluency with text, vocabulary, and comprehension. And the reason I included that slide was that there is actually a nice corresponding set of strands of mathematical proficiency that was published by the National Research Council back in 2002 from their publication, Helping Children Learn Mathematics. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that school psychologists, we're often in a position of being consultants to teachers, for example, to help that student who's struggling in mathematics. And what I like about this 5 strands of math proficiency is it really does break it down so that we're looking at that struggling math student, and these authors would say that we're looking at domains of functioning that include understanding, that student's comprehension of math concepts, operations, and relations. Computing, their ability to carry out math procedures such as adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing numbers flexibly, accurately, efficiently, and appropriately. So that's great. And then there's application, the students being able to formulate problems mathematically and devise strategies to solve them using concepts and procedures appropriately. So what I've just marched through here, understanding is conceptual knowledge, computing is more procedural knowledge, and applying is more of a metacognition. And what the authors also point out is that one of those important kind of math skills or areas of proficiency is really student reasoning. That a student's ability to use logic to explain and justify how they arrived at a solution to a problem, or to extend from something they know to something less known. And so when you're dealing with reasoning, this is really kind of a synthesis. The student has to have understanding, computing, and application. It all bundles together, and they have to be able to put that into words. And finally, and I found this to be the most interesting of all those strands, the NRC talks about engagement. The students seeing mathematics as sensible, useful, and doable if you work at it, and being willing to do that work. I really noted engagement because that actually is not a, strictly speaking, a math skill. It's motivation, it's student engagement. And I think what that points to is the fact that for so many of our struggling kids, if they don't have, a sense of self-efficacy, they're going to struggle. And so often our math interventions have to have an element of motivation for that student. Yeah, go ahead.
Mind if I interrupted you? I think they have a fix for our video problems.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to X out the Hangout and then rejoin, and then I think people should be able to see you. Does that make sense? I'll send you another invitation, and in the meantime, maybe we'll derail a little bit and talk about a little mini topic. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. I'm out of here.
Okay.
Boy.
You want to open up our mini topic, Rebecca? I apologize to everyone that we're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but hopefully we'll be back.
Yes, and it actually fits really well with our mini topic, because our mini topic was faux pas, school psych faux pas, things that you have done accidentally that you wished that maybe you didn't. And I have so many, but the one I wanted to share with you guys was that one time during my internship, I was asked at the end of the school year, when things were really busy, to go in and observe a student. I looked at his picture from the yearbook, and I went into a classroom, and for 45 minutes I diligently observed and took notes, and then I came down and I shared with my supervisor all my observations, and it turned out that I watched the wrong student. That was a really bad one. How about you, Rachel? Did you have one?
Okay. I'm thinking maybe we'll go back to Jim then.
Okay.
And then I promise I'll share my faux pas as well, Rebecca, because I don't want you to be alone. But maybe I'm sorry, Jim, that we disrupted your presentation, but I'm hoping
that... Okay, I'm glad I could be used as an excuse for you to avoid your embarrassing faux pas. Now that you're off the hook. Folks, when I was talking with you before, I was discussing Math RTI, and I've actually posted, some of you know there's some really excellent guides, practice guides that have been posted on the What Works Clearinghouse website. The one that I have the screenshot of here is the Assisting Students Struggling with Mathematics, RTI for elementary and middle schools. Great intro, I think, for schools, for administrators and teachers. I think you guys as consultants can use that. And then there's another 5 or so practice guides that deal with mathematics also that are relevant for RTI that I've posted on the conference page. So I think that you'll find that useful. Here's a screenshot actually of the segment of the page we set up for this workshop. which, by the way, if you didn't have the video before, I want to give that to you again because those resources are posted. interventioncentral.org/school psyched. And if you go there, as some of you may have already done, we've got a webpage set up with all the resources that I'm sharing during this podcast. So check that out, especially those math practice guides, really nice. And again, if you're trying to really reach out to your colleagues in schools and bring them on board with RTI math, I think that's a great way to go. Great entry-level set of documents. Of course, some of you are asking also about how RTI can be extended to include behavioral and social-emotional support. I mean, that is itself, just as the math is, its own workshop, full-day workshop. But just to hit some highlights, the majority of RTI, pyramid of intervention graphics braid academic and behavioral RTI together, which they should. And so on the behavioral side of RTI, we want to do something analogous to what we're doing on the academic side. We want to have 3 levels or tiers of intervention, and we want to have successively more intensive support as we're moving up those tiers. Having said that, one reason why there's a push to get RTI to move into the domain of behavioral, social, emotional is that we have a number of schools even now that are just beginning to move away from what had been known in the 90s and in this first decade of the 2000s as that zero tolerance period where we really had fairly rigid discipline policies that were largely punitive in focus. However, Russell Skiba and colleagues point out in a fairly recent article that schools that adopt a zero tolerance policy for disruptive student behavior that's reactive, that's punitive, tend to have substantially higher rates of school suspension and expulsion. They tend to spend, quote, a disproportionate amount of time, end quote, on discipline, and they tend to have lower rates of school-wide academic achievement, which is completely counterintuitive to what they were expecting they were going to get. And so John Magg, someone that I quote a lot, when he had an article called School-Wide Discipline and the Intransigency of Exclusion, he pointed out that if we're going to be helping students to be successful, we really have to have a shift in thinking, and that starts with the teacher. And so he noted, for example, that teachers and educators need to understand, to be sort of RTI ready, that all behavior has a function, even if it's undesirable behavior, and that those problem behaviors are going to persist until the student finds a way to attain that purpose through more acceptable replacement behaviors. Also helping teachers to remember that behaviors don't happen in isolation. They tend to happen because the student is having a need met, and that need is most often attention seeking and escape or avoidance. So kind of simplifying that a bit for the teacher. Reminding the teacher that verbal praise is a very powerful tool that's not used nearly enough in schools. It's not, we don't want to react and catch kids out, misbehaving. We want to acknowledge those appropriate behaviors. Also, remembering that when kids misbehave during academic tasks, we need to first make sure the kids can actually do the work and that the work is also not too easy before we start thinking about other, possible causes to that problem behavior. And finally, that when we want that, misbehaving student to behave, we need to make sure that we appropriately teach and reinforce those replacement behaviors. So if I have a student who is acting out to avoid an academic task, I think I might want to teach them how to, politely and appropriately request a break instead. So just getting teachers on board with that, I think, is an enormous, sign of progress for helping schools to adopt an RTI behavioral approach. One point I also want to make is that, one of the big differences that I've discovered in working with schools in implementing RTI on the behavioral side versus the academic side is that while not always true, academic interventions can typically be scheduled. So there's a reading group that meets for 30 minutes 3 times a week, for example. So it's predictable, it's scheduled, people are lined up. Behavioral interventions, not always, but quite often are contingency driven. So as you guys know, because you oversee these plans and you consult, etc., but they're often administered contingent on the occurrence or possibility of a student problem behavior. So, asking that teacher to use praise or pre-correction or other strategies often forces them to monitor a student and respond to problem behaviors. And for teachers, that's sometimes more difficult to manage. We have to kind of find ways to support them in that. I just want to hit a couple highlights about, what a school can look forward to if it were to, adopt what I'll call a behavioral or a social emotional RTI model. And this is from Frank Gresham and some colleagues in a fairly recent article. they point out that in that RTI school that's on board, behavioral concerns tend to be conceptualized in terms of risk rather than deficits. So the kid isn't broken, they're just at risk. And that tends to make us more proactive instead of wait to fail. We also tend to have greater objectivity and referral of students. That is, referrals for disciplinary or behavioral issues tend to be based more on objective behavioral or social emotional indicators, rather than on minority status or other non-behavioral factors. I think that's important. Also, because we're working from this behavioral model, school psychologists and teachers, we're trying to analyze potential triggers and outcomes that influence behavior, and we're also focusing on positive outcomes. So we tend to steer ourselves and our colleagues away from simply blaming kids for how they're behaving. And I like the fact that teachers right in the middle, she or he is at the center of that RTI social emotional model, as it becomes clear that student behavior changes only in response to changes in adult behavior. I think that's an important lesson. So there's obviously a lot of advantages to getting that RTI behavioral social emotional model in place. Here's a screenshot of what I've got on the conference page. The Rti Action Network has a very nice 4-article series on behavioral interventions and support, so you might want to check that out, and I have a link to that. The What Works Clearinghouse has some really nice practice guides on reducing behavior problems in the elementary school classroom and dropout prevention, and the National Center on Intensive Intervention has a behavioral intervention tools chart, so you can check out different intervention programs, as well as a progress monitoring tools chart that any psychologist would want to check out.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt again. I'm seeing, it looks like maybe you're frozen because I'm only seeing one slide of your PowerPoint. Oh, no, there it goes. Okay, I thought that maybe you were frozen, but you're good.
Okay, great. One of the questions I had also about was how to schedule RTI Tier 2 and 3 services. How do we do that? One thing I've got here, and it'll be in the PowerPoints if people want to download them, are some quality indicators for Tier 2 and 3 interventions. But what I've highlighted or bolded here is the fact that the intervention needs to have enough contact time to make a difference, because obviously Tiers 2 and 3 are supplemental interventions. And if it's Tier 2, I'd be expecting that intervention to be happening at least 3 days a week for sessions of 30 minutes or more. Tier 3 interventions, ideally daily for 30 minutes or more. And that becomes really difficult to schedule unless we've carved time out in that school schedule. So schools that are successful in really delivering these Tier 2 and 3 services, in my experience, are those that really do carve out that intervention block, that RTI time, at least a half hour per day. And you're going to see in this lovely pastel shade slide that we've got a K through 5 school, so we've got 6 grade levels. And each grade level schedules RTI time, their half-hour RTI intervention block, at a different time from the other grade levels. And each classroom at each grade level shares their RTI intervention time. And that's deliberate, because that first allows us, within a grade level, to move kids around to different classrooms during the intervention block, potentially so that one teacher could work with a small group of students who need Tier 2 supplemental intervention support, while their other students could either do independent work that's review, or could go over to other classrooms and larger class sizes for grade level review or even enrichment. But we also have no overlap between grade levels in that RTI intervention block, because that allows any interventionist, any math teacher, any reading teacher providing RTI support to push in or pull out at each grade level and be able to reliably get the kids they need when that time is scheduled. So I think this is probably the best solution for the elementary level. We probably have some listeners from middle and high school, though, and their scheduling becomes hugely more problematic.
For sure.
So I'll just share with you, I've worked with schools that have still been able, at the middle or high school, to set aside a school-wide RTI period, during which each kid gets what they need. Some of the students who don't need RTI get review or enrichment, but the RTI students are able to work with staff members to get smaller group size and research-based interventions. I realize it's exponentially more difficult to schedule that, but they've got that. I've worked with middle and high schools that also have created a zero period, typically a period before the official start of the school day, where students are encouraged to come in who need RTI. And during that zero period, they typically get some kind of attractive course, elective course, and then during the day that frees them up for a period to actually get RTI support. So that zero period works for some schools. Very often what schools will do is to take a core course, math or English language arts, for example, and they'll just build in a double period if they're in 45-minute blocks for that, and they'll enlist the Tier 2 kids into that double course. The teacher's able to spend one of those periods doing the core instruction and the second period delivering Tier 2 support to that same group. I had one school, quite inventive, that scheduled some of their Tier 2 kids into a mixed study hall, mixed being some of those kids were RTI and some were not. And they also scheduled opposite that this series throughout the year of these 6-week mini courses that were addressing different aspects of English language arts, intervention and remediation. And so in each of those 6-week cycles, they would recruit students from the study hall who would benefit from that, and then run it for 6 weeks and then exit them. And then the students always had a study hall in their schedule to kind of go back to. So we didn't have scheduling mayhem at that high school. There are schools that do have online credit recovery systems. I do have some schools that have looked at having students take some of their core courses via online credit recovery, and that again frees up a space in the school day for them to get some of that RTI support. None of those are perfect ideas, but some ideas for trying to schedule, because if we don't schedule that time, it's very difficult to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I have a quick question, kind of.
Sure.
I didn't see this. I was briefly in New York for practicum, and I didn't see it done there. But when I went to North Carolina, they would use special education teachers and special education groups as an intervention. So if there was a student in the referral process for SPED identification, they might pull them into a pull-out session with a SPED teacher and a bunch of SPED students as an intervention. And monitor that. How do you feel about that? And I'm not sure if they do that in New York or not, because I'm sure there's legalities with, you know, who
right. All that stuff. I've worked with both in New York and other parts of the country schools that actually do that. So long as we're very careful to make sure that the student who is not identified is actually in a group that matches their intervention needs, and as long as we're kind of using our RTI standards to progress monitor and to guarantee the effectiveness and the integrity of the intervention, I would be fine with that. I'm also, though, very careful, because the one thing I'm nervous about is that people then say, well, they were getting special ed and look how well they did, they must need special education. That it can become a self-reinforcing sort of scenario. So literally, if they didn't respond to the special ed intervention, they need special ed. If they did respond, then they need special education. So you have to watch out for that. And the way I watch out for that is to make sure people are clear up front. Look, success in this group means RTI worked. It means this child's not disabled. Let's make sure that we're in agreement there first.
Yeah, that's a good point.
One of the questions that I had also was, what's the role of RTI information in the identification of disabilities? And so let me just flip back over to my screen share. And so very quickly, what I've got here is a screenshot of the federal definition of learning disability, which...
We're not seeing that for some reason. I'm not sure if you have it on the right. Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry. Maybe it's just delayed.
You know what it is? I think sometimes it's when I actually go to the display. Do you see it now in display mode?
Yes. Yeah. I see. It's in PowerPoint mode. It's not like a full screen. But, I mean, what you see down at the bottom with all of our faces should be what everyone sees.
Yeah, let me just go back and... Okay. At any rate, the federal definition for learning disability, and you guys have this memorized, among other things, means a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes. So I'm going to point to that. And then the disorder is not included. Specific learning disability does not include learning problems that are primarily the result of environmental, cultural, or economic disadvantage. And so my own take on RTI information and its use in special education, learning disability identification, is that I don't personally present RTI information as being the full diagnostic picture for a possible learning disability, but that what that RTI information does do, and it does it very well, is that it rules out instruction as the explanation for why that student is struggling. Dr. Lynn Fuchs talks about that dual discrepancy model. The fact that I've got a student struggling, they've got a discrepancy in their skills compared to peers. We put them in intervention, And we hope to see, as you see in this graphic, that the student begins to really close that gap with peers. But if you have that student who's been through several interventions, successively, more intensive, greater intensity, and they're not really closing that performance gap, then now I've got a student who's got both a performance gap and a gap in rate of learning, slope of improvement. That dual discrepancy, that double gap, tends to tell me I've got a non-responding student. So at least what that special education eligibility team can draw from this is that the student got the appropriate instruction and intervention, that the reason for that student failing to make progress appears to be within child. It's not the fault of instruction. And at least at the special ed table, often that's the most important question to answer. Because we can look at two students who have what looks like a learning disabled profile, but we know, looking at that profile, that often poor instruction could be the explanation. And so what RTI does, in one way it's kind of modest, but in the other way it's huge, is it simply rules out instructional factors as explaining that student's delay. And that's exactly how I recommend that schools use that. There is some disagreement. Some trainers out there really say the RTI information alone should be enough to find a student disabled, etc., if they fail to respond. And I respect that, but I think that puts an inordinate amount of responsibility on the school to really have an airtight process that, for now at least, many schools are striving to attain. Which brings us to the school psychologist's role in supporting RTI at the school or district level. That was one of the questions. What's our role? You're going to see I really got going on this one. Oh, it's nothing except this. That psychologist needs, of course, to have good consultation skills, and they're consulting on behavioral, social, emotional, and academic ideas for intervention plans. They're also needing to understand the role of data, school-wide screening to proactively identify kids for RTI Tier 2, and also progress monitoring, intervention progress monitoring. The psychologist should know how to run a structured RTI problem-solving meeting, whether that happens at Tier 1, brainstorming with a teacher, or Tier 2, helping to assign kids to intervention groups, or Tier 3, having a half-hour meeting on an individual student who's got reading delays and difficulty with attention in the classroom. That psychologist is often crucial, at least in my experience, in helping to bring change at the building and district level. So that's systems level change. And psychologists, I think, do well to really pair up with administration, who have that managerial control to help to develop and deploy, a comprehensive multi-year, building or district rollout plan. That psychologist also will encounter very often, for often good reasons, that staff are kind of reluctant to embrace RTI, and so they have to figure out, okay, what's the blocker here? What are the objections, and how do we overcome them? And finally, again, last but not least, I think that psychologist helps to, ensure quality control. I call it the Rti Audit. That on an ongoing basis, they don't have to do it all, but they have to kind of oversee or at least guide, doing things like what? Like conducting those regular integrity checks, or tracking the number of students in RTI who eventually get referred to special education, to get a sense of, how strong and effective the RTI model is in sustaining kids who otherwise are having some difficulties. So that's what I would see that school psychologist role as, just that, but that's plenty, I think. Actually, that's the end of the formal slides I've got. Those are the big questions. I know there's a few other questions and some may have come in, but I'm going to switch back over to camera mode, and we can kind of do a Q&A if that's okay.
Sure. I do want to say we have a winner of the first book, excellent. Melissa. She's an awesome assistant principal in an elementary school and a mom to 3 boys. So we're really excited for you, Melissa. And yeah, so far I'm not finding any questions. I'm sure everyone's listening intently and absorbing all of this information. But I did have a question. I happen to work, Jim, in a private school. So we often either receive evaluations from public schools, or sometimes we need to refer students back to the public school to have a full evaluation. And I'm wondering about, it gets really tricky because we have our own kind of version of RTI and data collection and progress monitoring, but we're a really small school, and I like to think we're a really great school with small classes, and we have just sort of more time and ability to address kids' needs quickly compared, I think, to the public school. So when we refer a child to the public school, it takes so long for them to get through the RTI process when we have already had our version of the process. Do you have any suggestions for how I, as the school psychologist, or how school psychologists at private schools can make that work a little bit more smoothly?
Sure. I'm going to start by saying that I was actually in a different position. I was in a public school as sort of a coordinating psychologist who often had to work with private schools.
Yeah.
And so from our point of view, we were asking the question, how do we help these private schools to understand our expectations for, pre-referral intervention before it was RTI?
Right.
I'm wondering whether it makes sense for you to be able to meet with any of the players in any of these systems and review with them what your RTI model is, because I'm wondering whether they either fully understand or appreciate kind of what that looks like, and if they have their own way of doing things that's not going to compromise your model, there may be some adjustment in there that would help them to sort of look at your RTI information and say, oh yeah, this is according to our standard. Yeah, we'll just accept it. We no need to go back and reinvent that wheel. One of the things we also did, now this is, myself, we're kind of working in a public school setting with private schools, was when we did internal training around issues that we would now call RTI, we would also try to invite some of these private schools, and so you can maybe flip that around, because not only were they appreciative of the training, but that also created some connections, so that then if I had to pick up the phone and talk with one of the contacts, it didn't feel quite so distant, quite so strained, quite so foreign.
Yeah. Those are great suggestions, and I'm just completing my year 1 at my current position in my school, so those will be my first priorities in the fall.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of the questions we also had that I didn't do a PowerPoint for, I just want to talk about, was a question of how do you actually do RTI in a budget. And the reason I'm bringing that one up is that the paradox is that for schools that have very few resources, I think RTI becomes even more indispensable, because, and I've worked with schools that are pretty well funded, and honestly those schools kind of make it without RTI because they've got enough money to, even if they have redundant programming or they're not using staff well, they've got enough resources to still kind of go through and get the needs met. But when schools really find themselves at a disadvantage with limited resources, that's when they have to be able to ask themselves questions like, do we have the protocol to kind of go into a classroom and verify that in every classroom strong core instruction is happening? That doesn't take a huge investment of resources. It does take a single unified vision of what that strong core instruction looks like. Do we have a shared understanding of who would qualify for Tier 2, which kid's hurting, or do we put kids into Title I/Tier 2 support, leave them in there all year without any regard? And so I think RTI just makes sure when we have literally very limited resources, we're going to have a model that maps out what those resources are, has a very good plan for identifying who needs those supports, has a plan for moving those kids up or down those tiers in weeks, not months. And so literally, those kids who are needing that support are much more likely to get it in a timely manner, and we're not wasting our funds. So I feel for schools that are struggling, have limited resources, and are trying to take on RTI. But RTI is not at fault for those limited resources. It's simply a model to help them to make better use of those resources.
I have a question as well. Before I ask it, I want to encourage the audience, send in your questions and comments and whatnot and partake in this discussion. That way we can, give you some better information if people are asking, instead of us trying to take guesses at what people want to know. But my question is, I've seen schools get kind of fixated on the need for research-based, and they want to buy, the fancy program, the box that says that this is research-based, and kind of get that one-size-fits-all program. And I try to tell teachers that, you know, you don't necessarily maybe have to buy a program to do a research-based intervention. That, you know,
Right.
I don't know what your thoughts are on that as far as packaged programs, and do you need one?
A lot of that depends on what level we're doing intervention. So one thing that I personally do as a trainer is try to encourage teachers to be able to you know, use classroom strategies. So I would literally call that a Tier 1 intervention plan. For those teachers, I'm absolutely wanting them to use what's out there that's freely available, but that's research-based. A simple practice like repeated reading. You don't need to buy a shrink-wrap program to do that. Certainly, there are practices out there that could be, you know, amped up and used at Tier 2, and so that's true. I also want teachers to know that if they do decide to purchase a program, they really should go to a reputable clearinghouse to find out what works. And of course, What Works Clearinghouse is the best one out there. But I think your point's well taken, Rachel, that we want to make sure that schools realize that there's a lot of, in fact, it's an increasing number of good resources out there that don't cost money. And the teacher can you know, get a hold of a good script. They can look at the citations that show the research that intervention write-up came from. For example, the Evidence-Based Network over at the University of, you know, Missouri, Chris Riley Tillman, just some really excellent work being done there. And I think maybe kind of going back to Psychologist, one of the roles that we can play there is to make sure that teachers are aware of all the good resources that are out there. They're often very manageable, very quick, very feasible in classrooms that don't require that anybody go to a purchasing department to buy them. Yeah.
Awesome. I had one more kind of question, comment. It sort of goes along with my RTI faux pas. I've worked in schools where they think interventions are just like preferential seating. Oh, well, I moved into the front of the class. Or, oh, I gave them extra time on this test. Like, those are the interventions that have been done. Like, here, do your eval and try and classify them, or we're going to repeat a grade. Have them repeat a grade, or, you know, like, sometimes there's some sort of shady practice going on in some private schools that I've worked in the past. So there's definitely a need for more understanding of what those resources are and what they can do. And I think those are, I'm guessing those are on your website?
Yes, but you know, you're making a point that I think is important, that for schools, the most important part of RTI is actually getting the classroom teacher on board and helping them to be able to do classroom interventions. I think in some ways it's not always the fault of the classroom teacher that they're not able to be consistent in identifying what a good intervention is and knowing how to do it. When I go and work with schools around RTI, for example, I'll ask this question. Who in this room can tell me which kids in the classroom a teacher should be doing interventions with, where the bank is of intervention ideas that a teacher should be drawing from, the single, unified, simple form a teacher should be using for documenting the interventions that they're using, exactly how long that intervention should last before the teacher seeks additional help. And so when I ask that question, I often get these blank looks. And if the RTI sort of lead people can't really be specific about what Tier 1 interventions are supposed to be, I can understand completely why classroom teachers struggle with that. So I think for schools, the sort of fastest way to get teachers on board to understand what an intervention is and what the role is and to follow through on that is to assemble the toolbox I just described. And then, and this is crucial, I then ask teachers when we're really ready to roll this out to take just one student in their classroom who would, you know, benefit from a Tier 1 intervention and really pilot the process with that one kid. Because once teachers go through that one pilot, a lot of the resistance goes away. It's like, oh, that wasn't so bad, that was fairly easy. Otherwise, they look at this as a daunting task and it really overwhelms them. So just trying to kind of crack that classroom, that's where I think a lot of school psychologists' skill and talent needs to go.
That's where we come in.
It is. That's why we're irreplaceable. Job security. Absolutely.
I like it. All right, I know we're going to start to wrap up, so I'm thinking I'll go back. I'll fess up and share my little faux pas because Anna, you just shared yours right now. So I'm right now. I've got several high schools that I'm working with, and so they need a lot of support with RTI. And at one point, I got a child in the referral process and said, "Okay, just so you guys know, the parent was this child tested, they need to be in the RTI process concurrently so we can start to gather some of that data. And the response I got from administration was, well, no, they're ELL, so they don't get RTI. And I was like, oh! I did this, what do you mean? And there was a lot of pushback that, no, they're ELL, so they don't get RTI. I'm like, this is discrimination. And I started to get, like, kind of heated up. But really what they meant was the ELL kids in this district, in this system, go through and get their interventions through the ELL team that knows the kid and meets on the kid. And so they weren't saying that they're not getting interventions. They were saying they're not getting the RTI through the RTI team. They're getting the interventions through the ELL team. So I got I got really tense and upset for a little while, but then, you know, okay, as long as they're getting the interventions and it's documented, I'm cool with that. So that was my little faux pas.
Well, at least you were passionate for the right reason.
We have one more book to give away. Should we talk about that? So the next person who can go on the School Psyched podcast page and type in the comments Love Intervention Central and Psyched Podcast will get a signed copy of Jim's new book.
Pretty easy, guys.
Hey, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Of you? Because you guys are really kind of advancing the world of school psychology and social media, can you talk a little bit about the sort of potential role of social media to help school psychologists? Any thoughts?
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts. As a newbie, especially, I think that this connectedness that I've been feeling on Facebook and Twitter with not only school psychologists, but school counselors and occupational therapists and speech therapists and principals and teachers is just the inspiration that I feel from sharing ideas and resources is so helpful to me because I'm the only psych in my building. And I don't, you know, in our day-to-day work, sometimes we don't have a lot of opportunity to collaborate like we should, like I'd like to. So to be, you know, to do that separately online and have that sense of community and collaboration is so helpful. And I've found so many resources just by looking for them and sharing them. And I think the Google Drive that the three of us have shared and put together has such potential to be really helpful for a lot of people, because if we all share even one thing that helps us at work, we can have a, you know, a sort of a national collection of ideas of inspiration. What do you guys think?
I agree. Totally.
I think that, you go to grad school. Oh, sorry, my cat's here. So
we're wondering when they would come.
Grad school for a few years, you know, it doesn't mean you know everything all of a sudden. So, like, we have to have ongoing professional development, and we have to have people that we can connect with and reach out to. And I think that, you know, the podcast is one way, but there's lots of opportunities in social media if you're willing to put yourself out there a little bit.
Right. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for participating. I'm guessing we have a Facebook winner, Rebecca, but while you're looking that up, I'm going to tease for, we're going to go on hiatus with Psyched Podcast because it's summer break, woo! So we're probably going to do either 0 or 1 podcast over the summer, but if you guys have interest in a topic or something, let us know on our page. We have a few topics that we are interested in sharing with you. We have someone who has neuropsych experience that's willing to come on the podcast. Talking about traumatic brain injuries is something that we're also finding very interesting, and also a bilingual psychologist we're looking into having on our program. So more to come. Let us know what you're interested in. We'd be happy to talk about it, even if we don't have experience. We'll find awesome people who do. Case in point.
Yep, and we have a winner, Jeff. So he's going to send us his mailing information and a private message, and he wins the book. Congratulations, Jeff. And thanks for watching.
So we're gonna wrap up. Thanks, Jim, for coming on. We really appreciate your help and your.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I enjoyed this.
Thank you so much, and for your books. I'm such a huge fan.
And sorry for the audio-visual difficulties. That's always got to be something. But I think we were on our toes and we figured it out before the end. So that's.
Yeah, you handled it.
Yeah.
Video.
Bye.